Many of you who are watching are not yet subscribed. Subscribe now, and you can change your mind later.
Missing man surfaces in a Texas swamp. Strapped to his chest is a chilling record of his final minutes. Texas Rangers hope it will help unravel a case of double homicide. Police have a suspect in a cold-blooded killing, just not the technology to match him to the crime. Will science catch up to the killer before he slips away for good? On July 27, 1982, Texas Rangers were called to an abandoned car in a remote drainage ditch near Santa Rosa. The inside had been torched. A check of the plates showed that the car was registered to Billy Staton, who, along with his girlfriend, Letty Castro, had been missing for 10 days. It was the first break in the case, and one that Rangers desperately needed. Once the car was pulled from the swamp, investigators noticed something even more suspicious. A rock had been set on the accelerator. It appeared that a deliberate attempt had been made to get rid of the car and conceal a crime. But the fire and days of exposure to the elements had erased all fingerprints and ruined any chance of linking the crime to a suspect. The rock was the only clue authorities had to lead them to the missing couple.
Not near.
But if the condition of the car was any indication, things didn't look good for Billy Staton and Letty Castro. Texas Ranger Bruce Castile feared the worst.
Well, after finding the vehicle, we started an extensive search with numerous individuals searching canals, brushy areas in an attempt to find Letty Castro and Billy Staton. We felt like at that time that they had been murdered.
Rangers combed the area for the bodies, certain that they couldn't be too far from the scorched car. They trudged through miles of dense brush along the drainage ditch for any sign of the couple. After 4 days of searching, they still had found nothing. But the Rangers weren't discouraged. They'd built a reputation on their ability to solve extremely difficult cases. The Texas Rangers were organized in 1823 by Stephen F. Austin to protect the first settlers of Texas from Indians. 50 years later, in the rowdy days of the Wild West, the Rangers earned their name as tough lawmen by tracking down bandits, bank robbers, horse thieves, and cattle rustlers. Today, Rangers are as tenacious as ever. As a state police agency, they're highly trained in investigative and forensic techniques to assist local law enforcement. The Texas Rangers tackle only the biggest and most complex criminal cases. And the simple missing persons case was becoming more difficult with every day. Rangers questioned Letty Castro's brother, who told authorities that he last saw the couple on July 16th, when he stopped by the trailer she shared with Billy Staton. That was the same day they left to pick up Staton's 9-year-old daughter at his ex-wife's house. The two were going to be married soon and hoped to obtain full-time custody of the girl. But their dreams disappeared just as quickly as they did. The Rangers also learned from Letty Castro's brother of the Statons' ugly custody battle. Billy Staton retained rights to keep his daughter every other weekend. His ex-wife Sherry didn't like to comply. Pickups were an especially distressing time. On checking up on Staton's ex-wife, rangers learned that Sherry and her new husband, Paul Wolf, had moved the day after Billy Staton and Letty Castro disappeared.
Probably within about 4 or 5 days, would be my guess.
When rangers caught up with him, they claimed that Staton never showed up to pick up his daughter.
You bet. Just keep me posted, George. Good to see y'all. Take care. You bet.
The rangers obtained a warrant to search the home that Paul and Sherry had vacated. A damp spot on the carpet encouraged detectives to probe a little further. What they found was puzzling. A small area on the back side of the carpet had been painted over. It seemed like a deliberate attempt had been made to cover something up. Sections of the carpet were shipped to the lab to see if technicians could determine anything. Agents tested the carpet. So they wouldn't destroy potential evidence, they removed some of the residue with a cotton swab. A chemical that changes color in the presence of blood was then added to the swab. The test was positive. The blood was human. Because of the limits of technology in 1982 and the contamination by the paint, they could not determine whose blood it was. But they discovered that the carpet contained a lot of it, and someone had gone to a lot of trouble to hide it. Upon closer examination at the house, investigators discovered tiny spatters of blood on the walls and curtains. They collected samples to send to the lab. If the bodies were ever found, the blood types could be compared. Something had definitely happened in the house. But the most interesting piece of evidence was found outside the home. It wasn't so much evidence as the absence of evidence, but it was rock solid. Ranger criminalist Joe Marchand uncovered precisely what had happened.
And we looked around and we finally found an indentation next to a tree where a rock used to be. So we went ahead and we had the rock at the time, and we went back and we basically fit it back as a jigsaw puzzle and put it back in its place.
Putting these pieces together, the Rangers turned to Paul Wolf, the husband of Billy Staton's ex-wife. This time, he changed his story. Paul now admitted that Billy and Letty Castro had arrived to pick up Billy's daughter. He told Rangers that Sherry and the girl weren't home when Billy arrived. Billy was so mad to find that his daughter wasn't there that he attacked Paul. Paul tried to defend himself and accidentally killed Billy with a metal bar. Billy's fiancée, Letty, heard the commotion and came running in. When she saw Billy on the floor covered with blood, she came after Paul. Once again, Paul Wolf said he beat her in self-defense, accidentally killing her too. Shocked and scared by what he'd done, Paul asked a buddy, Glenn Henderson, to help him dump the bodies in a drainage ditch. To get rid of Billy's car, he'd brought a large rock along to set on the accelerator, hoping to get the car to drive itself into the ditch. But it hadn't worked the way he'd planned, so he returned the next day and burned it. Paul Wolf admitted that he had lied the first time because he was confused and wasn't sure the Rangers would buy his story. Wolf then directed investigators to the bodies. Letty Castro's body was found floating in a drainage ditch 12 miles from where the car was located. Her skull showed the damage Paul Wolf described. But rangers also saw that she'd been shot in the head. It didn't match Wolf's confession. Clearly, he was lying. About 10 miles away, Billy Staton's body was found, partially submerged in a steep canal. His head was crushed. When the body was dragged out, the detectives made a peculiar discovery. Under his shirt, strapped around his waist, was a mini tape recorder. It was in bad shape from the water, but the cassette inside was still intact. It was a puzzling find. Rangers couldn't explain why Billy wore a tape recorder to his ex-wife's house, but they knew there was the possibility that Billy Staton had recorded his own murder. The Texas Rangers believed that the clue that would seal their case was taped to Billy Staton's body. The tape recorder found on the victim was treated with tremendous care. Days of water and mud had ruined most of the mechanism. But crime scene analyst Joe Marchand was hopeful about salvaging the cassette.
The most fascinating piece of evidence that we found was the tape recorder that was strapped to Billy Staton's stomach. We pulled the tape out. We called the FBI laboratory and asked them, what are we supposed to do? And they said, has it been submerged in water? Partially. They said, good, put it back in water and send it to us in a container. And it's better to be in water than letting the tape dry out.
After 10 long days, the tape was returned to the Texas Rangers. The FBI had done their best to save whatever had been recorded, but it was still uncertain whether it contained anything vital to the case. Within seconds of playing it, the sounds of Billy Staton being brutally murdered were perfectly clear. Armed with the recording, investigators went back to the scene of the crime to precisely match actions to audio. They measured distances and timed out the events as they corresponded to the sounds on the tape. The blood found in the house had been matched to Billy Staton. Now the patterns of the blood would tell more of the story. All the bloodstains on the wall had tiny tails, like teardrops. By studying and measuring those tails, examiners could determine exactly what angles the blood had come from. Combined with the audio tape, they could then piece together where Billy was in the room at the time he was beaten.
Now I want you to go ahead and pass it on to Roll.
The tape revealed to investigators exactly what happened that afternoon. Billy Staton showed up at the house and was invited in.
Billy's here.
Sherry Wolf and her daughter are clearly heard on the tape, refuting Paul's claims that they weren't home when Billy arrived. Detectives learned that soon after Billy's arrival, Wolf took out the trash. But the trash was just an excuse to get outside. He really just wanted to see if Billy had brought Letty with him, and he needed to grab the crowbar he'd hidden earlier. From the way the blood had spattered on the walls, and by listening carefully to the tape, it was obvious to Rangers that Billy Staton had no idea what was about to happen. He was seated, waiting patiently, when Paul Wolf struck. Wolf's accomplice, Glenn Henderson, had been hiding in another room. Once their victim was slumped on the floor, the two went out to murder Letty, who was waiting in the car. Without a doubt, Paul Wolf's self-defense plea was a lie. These were cold-blooded attacks on unsuspecting people. While the tape continued to roll, the killers carried Billy out to his car and put him in the trunk. They knew they'd need to get rid of the car as well as the bodies, and they took the rock with them. The fact that the murder weapons were planted and an accomplice was on hand helped to prove that these weren't spur-of-the-moment murders. They were planned in advance. Of course, what they didn't plan on was capturing their crime on tape.
And this is where they're looking. This is where they're looking to see where they're going to dump Letty. And you can hear the rocks hitting the bottom of the trunk, and they're traveling slow speed.
Wolf found a secluded area off a drainage ditch a few miles from the house. Glenn Henderson followed in his truck. The site was far off the road, and the grass was high enough to conceal a dead body. But something was wrong. Letty Castro was still alive. The killers, however, were prepared for such a hitch.
On the tape, you hear a single gunshot. Then you hear some yelling, which is inaudible. Then you hear the car door close in the vehicle and take off, and approximately 30 seconds later the tape runs out.
For some reason, they decided not to dump both bodies at the same spot. They left their next victim 9 miles down the road. The car was disposed of just as Wolf had described. The hard work was over. Back at the house, there was quite a bit of cleaning to do. In the short time they'd left their victim inside, struggling for life, a large pool of blood had collected on the carpet. The co-conspirators had to rent a professional carpet cleaner to cover their tracks. But even that wasn't enough. Blood had seeped through the carpet, staining the underside. In an attempt to conceal it, they painted over the spots. To put the crime behind them, the Wolfs went so far as to move out of the house the day after the murders. But nothing they could do would erase the evidence that Billy Staton had unwittingly recorded. Rangers discovered that Billy had worn the recorder on his lawyer's advice. He'd wanted to capture the appalling confrontation and Sherry's malicious behavior, hoping it could help him obtain custody of his daughter. Instead, he recorded his own murder. Paul and Sherry Wolf were both sentenced to life in prison for killing Billy Staton and Letty Castro. For his part, Glenn Henderson also received a life sentence.